LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the January 8th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see from the video title, my main topic is, will the Iowa caucuses confirm the Republican Party is a Trump personality cult? And actually 1 week from today, at the time when I usually do my show, that's when the Iowa caucuses will be taking place, and that will be the first confirmation by voters that the Republican Party has become a Trump personality cult. I'm going to be showing you clips, 5 different Republican clips, well, 4 different Republican politicians answering questions in a way that explains how the Republican Party has already kind of become a Trump personality cult. And then the Republican propaganda outlet of Fox News, I have a clip of their discussion as the 5th Republican clip that will be in the newsmaker clip section after the news summaries. And the news summaries are on a variety of different topics. If you look down in the video description, you can see short summaries of all of the clips I'm showing, all 11. And the first one is the political comedy clip. And it's coming from some of the outlandish things that Trump has been saying at his rallies in Iowa and New Hampshire over the weekend and over the last several weeks. You'll see some more of that in the news summary clips that I talked about. But I want to focus on this weird analysis of the Civil War from Trump on Saturday in Iowa. And the analysis is pretty comic itself. And it also shows his like narcissistic personality disorder that makes him like the great leader of a personality cult. But the 2 words that I find most comic in here are studying and reading. Studying and reading, which will become clear when you watch the clip, but I'll talk about that and the weird Civil War analysis a little more after we watch that clip together. Oh, and this is from the Right Side Broadcasting Network. It's like a right-wing YouTube channel, way to the right of Fox News. They do no fact-checking. I will do some fact-checking after we watch the clip together over here.
I love studying if you take a look, the wars, I don't know what it is. The Civil War was so fascinating, so horrible. It was so horrible, but so fascinating. It was, I don't know, it was just different. I just find it, I'm so attracted to seeing it. So many mistakes were made. See, there was something I think could have been negotiated, to be honest with you. I think you could have negotiated that. All the people died. So many people died. You know, that was the disaster. If you got hit by a bullet in the leg, you were essentially going to die or lose the leg. That's why you had so many people, no legs, no arms. If you got hit in the arm or the leg, it meant you were up because the infection, gangrene. It was just such a, sort of a horrible time. But I was thinking to myself, because I was reading something, and I said, this is something that could have been negotiated. It was just for all those people to die, and they died viciously. That was a vicious, vicious war. And in many ways, look, there's nothing nice about it. But boy, that was a tough one for our country. But I think it's, Abraham Lincoln. Of course, if he negotiated it, you probably wouldn't even know who Abraham Lincoln was. He would have been president, but he would have been president. He wouldn't have been the Abraham Lincoln. Would have been different, but that would have been okay. It would have been a thing that, and I know it very well. I know the whole process that they went through, and they just couldn't get along. And that would have been something that could have been negotiated, and they wouldn't have had that problem. But it was a hell of a time. And you think of it today, I would have absolutely stopped Putin. He would have never got in.
And I kept that going through the little transition there because you can see Donald Trump claiming that he loves arguing counterfactuals because they require no evidence. Like, if I had been, it wouldn't have happened. If he had been president, Putin would never have invaded Ukraine, which I mean, is there any way of proving or disproving that? And it is kind of an interesting addition to his analysis of what Lincoln did, because what he's really saying is, if I had been there, if Trump had been president at that time instead of Lincoln, he could have negotiated the whole thing. Slavery, we'll just split it down the middle. Like, people will be slaves in, the first 6 months of the year and not slaves. I don't know how you negotiate slavery. I guess you come up with some big compromise, like, oh, that was the Missouri Compromise, right? That was the comic words I was talking about. This came from him studying and reading and fact check right there. Does anyone really believe that Trump does studying, reading? Those are not words people associate with Donald Trump. And so that's my fact checking that the right side broadcasting network will never do, but they show the Trump rallies that you don't get to see on a lot of the corporate news outlets anymore. I guess because they are worried they gave him too much exposure 8 years ago in 2016 when he was running for president, like too much exposure like you get from the right side broadcasting network now. But anyway, I'm going to show you the news summaries now from longest to shortest, and the first one is a big set of facts as to why Trump is such a threat to our democracy, and that's going to be a big theme coming through here, that while Republicans won't admit what happened on January 6th, they continue to be election deniers. I'm going to do I'm going to commit some legal analysis later about this dodge that you'll see from the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and Representative Elise Stefanik, about how 2020 was the election in 2020 was unconstitutional because they usurped the power of state legislatures. I'll get to that. But before I get to that, and I want to get to the first of the news summaries here, it's ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where they broke some news. They had an investigation, or they got leaks from special counsel Jack Smith about things that Trump did and didn't do on January 6th. And listen to this report, because this is going to be really devastating evidence in terms of Trump's state of mind on January 6th at the supposed March 4th trial. That I don't think they're going to be able to keep the March 4th date. But listen to this evidence from one of his closest advisors, Dan Scavino. This guy used to be Trump's caddy. That's how he started working for Donald Trump. And then he's like the one other person who's allowed to tweet from Donald Trump's Twitter account during the time that Trump had a Twitter account during his presidency. And that's why some of this testimony is so devastating. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this longest of the news summaries together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we mark 3 years since the January 6th insurrection, the 2024 election is shaping up to be a referendum on what happened that day and what it means for the future of our democracy. That was the theme of President Biden's first campaign speech Friday as he blasted Donald Trump for January 6th.
Trump did nothing. It was among the worst derelictions of duty by a president in American history. An attempt to overturn a free and fair election by force and violence.
And in Iowa this weekend, Trump responded with repeated lies about the 2020 election and calls to free the convicted January 6th rioters, whom he called hostages. This morning, we have exclusive new reporting on what Trump was doing at the White House on January 6th as the rioters surged through the Capitol. Chief Washington correspondent Jon Karl starts us off. Good morning, John.
Good morning, George. Donald Trump's closest advisors in the White House have provided Jack Smith's team with an extraordinarily detailed description of what Trump was doing and what he was refusing to do as the U.S. Capitol came under attack. These are not Trump's critics. These are some of his most trusted aides. And according to sources familiar with the investigation, some of the most vivid and damning descriptions have come from Trump's longtime employee and current advisor, Dan Scavino. Dan Scavino has known Donald Trump since he was 15 years old. Worked for him for more than 3 decades, starting as his golf caddy. nobody inside the White House, outside of family, had a closer relationship with him.
The great Dan Scavino, most powerful man in politics.
Scavino, who helped manage Trump's Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook accounts, is also one of just a handful of people who were with Trump on January 6th as the attack on the Capitol was unfolding. The January 6th committee wanted to talk to him, but he defied their subpoena. After a court battle, he did finally talk to special counsel Jack Smith's team of investigators. Scavino's office was just outside the Oval Office, and sources familiar with the investigation tell ABC News Scavino told investigators he went in to see Trump as soon as he saw the violence had broken out at the Capitol. And he described Trump sitting in his small dining room next to the Oval Office, his arms folded, staring at the television, watching live coverage of the attack on Fox News. Trump was angry, Scavino told investigators, according to the sources, saying the election had been stolen from him and that his supporters were, quote, angry on his behalf. As has been described by the January 6th committee report, other advisors came in to see Trump as well, including White House lawyers, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and eventually his daughter Ivanka Trump, all urging him to make some kind of statement telling his supporters to leave the Capitol. The sources say Scavino described Trump as non-responsive and his demeanor as, quote, very unsettling as he continued staring at the TV. Soon, he told investigators, all of the advisors left the room, leaving Trump alone.
Senate will stand in recess until the call of the chair.
It was while Trump was alone watching television that the Senate was forced to adjourn with rioters approaching, and Vice President Mike Pence rushed to a secure location beneath the Capitol just as Trump tweeted, quote, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country. When advisors told Trump the tweet sent the wrong message, Trump, one of the witnesses told investigators, said, quote, but it's true. The tweet contributed to the anger of the crowd, some of the rioters chanting, hang Mike Pence. According to the sources, another White House aide, Nick Luna, told investigators that when he informed Trump that Pence had to be evacuated to a secure location because of the violence, Trump responded, quote, so what? Which, the sources say, Luna believed to show Trump was willing to let harm come to his loyal vice president. That's consistent with what Trump told me just a couple of months later about the threats to Pence.
Were you worried about him during that siege? Were you worried about his safety?
No, I thought he was well protected, and I had heard that he was in good shape. Mm-hmm. No, because I had heard he was in very good shape. But no,
you heard those chants. That was terrible. I mean, it was,
he could have. Well, the people were very angry.
You're saying hang Mike Pence.
Because it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right? Yeah. How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
Another one of those with Trump, White House lawyer Pat Philbin, told investigators that as Trump was watching the attack on TV, he told his aides, quote, this is what happens when they try to steal an election. The sources say Philbin responded, Mr. President, it doesn't justify this.
George Soros, you can go to hell.
As the riot continued, Scavino told investigators he said to Trump that the day's events were tarnishing his record as president. Quote, this is all your legacy here, and there's smoke coming out of the Capitol. The Trump campaign is already responding to this exclusive reporting from the ABC News investigative team, giving us a statement saying, quote, media fascination with secondhand hearsay shows just how weak the witch hunt against Donald Trump is. Dan Scavino is one of President Trump's longest-serving and most loyal allies, and his actual testimony shows just how strong Trump is positioned in this case. It's important to note, George, the campaign did not dispute what you just heard there from Dan Scavino, that he said on January 6th that the attack would be Trump's legacy and that there was smoke coming out of the Capitol. In response to that, the campaign told us President Trump and Dan Scavino both agreed that it could be part of legacy, but regardless, wanted to get it done and did it. There is no dispute over that.
Okay, John, let's bring in our reporter who's leading this investigation.
And the facts keep coming out if you keep watching that program, but that was like fascinating new information about the evidence that Jack Smith was able to get from Dan Scavino that the January 6th committee never was able to get. And, they also have expert witnesses on the cell phones, Trump's cell phone versus Dan Scavino's cell phone. I think I might have heard this on Morning Joe this morning, but I think I heard someone talking about how the, Mike Pence failed us text that they were just talking about there. That was Trump that tweeted that, and people were actually, I think it might have been also discussed. I'll have to go look at the transcript while the next clip is playing. I have the ABC transcript, ABC This Week, the George Stephanopoulos transcript. But the point I'm trying to make is that, there were some like positive, helpful tweets on January 6th, like be peaceful and don't harm law enforcement officers. That was like a Dan Scavino tweet, while the Mike Pence has failed us tweet or whatever that was the Donald Trump tweet. And that is going to be like devastating evidence against Donald Trump at the special counsel trial in the DC circuit. If that ever happens, we'll see whether it does or not. Sometime this year, hopefully it will happen, sometime before the election. But that was just the first of the news summaries I wanted to show you. It was the longest. I kept it playing all the way till they brought their senior reporter in. But down in the video description under sources, you can not only see that full Trump speech from Right Side Broadcasting Network on YouTube, but I put the source of all the clips down there. I'm also NBC News Meet the Press and CBS News Face the Nation have their full episodes available on their YouTube channels that I put down there. ABC, you might have to go through some link where you create an account, or you give them your cable provider or something, or wait a week before you can watch the whole program. But anyway, I'm going off on a useless tangent when I should be getting to the next news summary. It's NBC News Meet the Press. Kristen Welker also sets up the Trump versus Biden, where just before the Iowa caucuses and a week before the Iowa caucuses, Biden gave that big speech framing the election as an existential choice for the future of democracy for reasons you just saw described very well in that ABC News report. And then they show Trump responding to Biden's charges. I know I'm a threat to democracy. I know I'm a threat to democracy, but I know you are, but what am I? Is basically, I know you're a threat to a democracy, but what am I? Or no, sorry, I messed that whole thing up. But and then they also talk about the fact that the Supreme Court has taken up the issue of whether Section 3 of the 14th Amendment prohibits Donald Trump from being on the ballot because he engaged in insurrection. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Sunday morning, and welcome to this first show of the new year. The Iowa caucuses are just 8 days away. We are just 303 days from Election Day, and democracy is front and center. Faced with low approval ratings and trailing former President Trump in head-to-head polling, President Biden kicked off his 2024 campaign on Friday, on the third anniversary of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Biden framed the election as an existential choice for the future of democracy.
This is not rhetorical, academic, or hypothetical. Whether democracy is still America's sacred cause is the most urgent question of our time. And it's what the 2024 election is all about.
A new Washington Post University of Maryland poll shows a third of Republicans and nearly half of Trump voters believe the false claim that the FBI organized and encouraged the January 6th attack. That's despite one of the largest criminal investigations in American history, resulting so far in more than 1,250 charged, 890 convictions. President Biden accused Mr. Trump of refusing to denounce political violence. Just this week, bomb threats were reported at government buildings in at least 10 states, forcing lockdowns and evacuations at state capitals and courthouses across the country before the FBI determined the threats were a hoax.
Political violence is never, ever acceptable in the United States political system. Never, never, never. It has no place in a democracy, none. You can't be pro-insurrectionist and pro-American. And yet Trump and his MAGA supporters not only embrace political violence, but they laugh about it. At his rally, he jokes about an intruder, whipped up by the big Trump lie, taking a hammer to Paul Pelosi's skull and echoing the very same words used on January 6th. Where's Nancy? And he thinks that's funny.
Now, the Supreme Court will consider whether former President Trump can be banned from the ballot in Colorado because of his role on January 6th. Mr. Trump was disqualified from primary ballots in Colorado and Maine pending appeals on the grounds that anyone who swore an oath to uphold the Constitution and then, quote, engaged in insurrection or rebellion against it is no longer eligible for state or federal office. At least 18 additional states have unresolved 14th Amendment challenges. Trump, who is looking to cement his dominant lead in the polls with 4 Iowa rallies in 2 days, responded forcefully.
When you make your speech in front of millions of people and you're making the beautiful speech, looking down to the wire, that was one of the great scenes I've ever seen. By the way, I think J6 had an equal amount of people. It's the biggest crowd I believe I ever spoke to. You never hear about that, do you? You have the hostages, the J6 hostages, I call them. Nobody's been treated ever in history so badly as those people. You know what they ought to do? They ought to release the J6 hostages. They've suffered enough. They ought to release them. I call them hostages.
And joining me now is a key Trump ally, Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York.
Oh, this is my cat, Cheech. I'm going to have a bonus Cheech and Chong, the cats. I have Cheech and his brother Chong. That's the names they had when we adopted them at the shelter. They came named Cheech and Chong. I need to point that out because of some very, very insulting comments I saw at the end of the live stream last week about why I might have named them Cheech and Chong. But no, they came named Cheech and Chong. And this is Cheech here. I just thought I would show him during the live stream, even though I have the bonus clip at the end. Maybe I'll have a chance to show you Chong as well. Cheech is the fluffier one, the medium hair one. He's also actually much more likely to come and let me do this. Oh, now he's biting me, but I'm going to put him down. And I'm going to talk about the clips. That was Kristen Welker, who has Elise Stefanik on. You saw a lot of really offensive stuff from Trump there that you won't see at all on Fox News Sunday, the next news summary I'm going to show you. And they talked about what Trump said at the rallies, but didn't show any of those clips about January 6 hostages. And Representative Elise Stefanik also called them hostages. And I didn't take that clip, but down in the video description, I put the entire Meet the Press episode available on YouTube. You can watch it yourself. But I thought that was a pretty good news summary from NBC News Meet the Press. Kristen Welker talking about basically the existential threat to democracy, the Biden speech, giving some good examples that you also won't see on Fox News Sunday or any of the Fox News Sunday clips I'm showing you. But yeah, I think that kind of set up the Trump cult of personality, denying the 2020 election results and threatening our democracy on the one side, and then Joe Biden on the other. That's kind of what's set up for the 2024 election. But I still have some news summaries to get to before I show you how Republicans are falsely contesting the 2020 election still. And Mike Pence, the guy they were trying to hang, is claiming it wasn't an insurrection. And anyway, I'll get to those newsmaker clips after I finish the news summaries. The next one is Fox News Sunday. Didn't cover any of the stuff you just saw, really. Mostly focused in on Biden's border crisis all week, like all day, every day on Fox News. They call it Biden's border crisis. For some reason on Fox News Sunday, they're supposedly the most journalistic program on Fox News, so they just call it a border crisis. although that's a term that is kind of politically loaded, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the Fox News Sunday news summary from the host Shannon Bream. And then they have Casey Stegall at the border because Bill Melugin is in Iowa, and I'll show you a little bit of Bill Melugin's report later in clip 7, but this is clip 4. The clip list is down in the video description if you really want to follow along, and I'll talk about this clip a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. Fresh off the highest single month of illegal crossings in U.S. history, the pressure to pass sweeping border security reforms attached to aid for Israel and Ukraine gears up as the clock ticks towards a potential government shutdown. Republicans who have long called for tighter border restrictions have found unlikely support from blue city mayors, calling on the White House for swift action to address the surge of migrants in their cities as their areas become overwhelmed with buses full of people being transported to their cities by border state Republicans. In a moment, we're going to talk with two leaders at the center of this debate, Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott and Denver Democratic Mayor Mike Johnston. But first, we turn to Casey Stegall, live from the southern border in Eagle Pass, Texas. Hello, Casey.
Shannon, good morning. A new year has started with new activity out here on the front lines of this escalating crisis.
Migrants climbed through the border wall this week in Lukeville, Arizona, after cartels cut a hole in the steel structure. While in Eagle Pass, Texas, hundreds continued to illegally cross and turn themselves in.
They're just, waiting to be arrested, knowing full well that if they're arrested and claim political asylum, they'll be processed as a political asylee until their case is heard.
CBP sources tell Fox more than 302,000 migrant encounters were recorded at the southern border last month. That's roughly the entire population of Pittsburgh.
Every state and city in this country is a border state.
House Speaker Mike Johnson led a delegation of more than 60 Republican lawmakers to Eagle Pass, where they put pressure on Democrats to reach a deal on immigration restrictions. While on the ground, Johnson also made this prediction about the 2024 election.
But I do believe, in large measure because of this issue, I do think that we're going to have a change in the White House. I think we're going to have a Republican president. I think we're going to win the Senate, and we're going to expand the majority in the House as well.
The administration shot back, accusing the GOP of standing in the way.
We have House Republicans that's literally blocking the president's effort to do something. That's what they're doing. They're playing political games.
And all eyes will be on Washington next week, with DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas facing an impeachment inquiry on Wednesday. But first, he will travel back down here to Eagle Pass for another operational visit scheduled for tomorrow. Shannon?
We know you'll have us covered on that. Casey Stegall, live at the southern border. Thank you, Casey. Joining us now, Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott.
And I don't have a clip of Texas Governor Greg Abbott because he was not asked any questions about Trump's threat to democracy, him calling the January 6 defendants and convicts hostages, or any of the other many ridiculous things. They don't do that on Fox News. They don't ask Republicans to defend the most outlandish things Trump is saying. And you saw they had the border crisis chyron under Casey Stegall's report there. It wasn't Biden's border crisis, and they showed that video of all these migrants coming through what Casey Stegall called a steel structure. That's the funniest part of that report, because I've seen that video all week. They cut a hole in the steel structure. That steel structure. It's Trump's border wall. And it's so easy to cut a hole in it. That's walls work. Well, that wall isn't working because all you have to do is cut a hole in it, and streams and streams of migrants can come through. Migrants who, by the way, are requesting asylum. They're refugees. Not all of them will be adjudicated as having legitimate asylum claims, but the right to request asylum, that is protected under international law, and it's not illegal, even if you can't get to a port of entry And I mean, you notice all these migrants there, once they stream through that hole in the steel structure, they like line up and ask to be taken into custody by Border Patrol agents. And they need more money to, well, I don't want to go into the whole Biden's border crisis fallacy I've discussed many times before, but I just had to talk a little bit about that ridiculous border crisis report from Fox News Sunday. There'll be sort of a similar report from Face the Nation, but a little more fair and balanced. But before that is the CNN State of the Union news summary, about the same length as Fox News Sunday, but it focuses a lot more on the outlandish things that the probably like almost inevitable nominee for of the Republican Party for president, Donald Trump. He's been saying the most outlandish things, and not just his claim that he could have like stopped the Civil War if he'd been president instead of Lincoln, which I showed at the beginning. There's like a whole bunch of other stuff, and I think Jake Tapper did the best job of, I mean, you saw some of it in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, and then ABC instead told you all sorts of like scandalous things about what Trump did on January 6th. And anyway, here's Jake Tapper doing a good job of summarizing the things that would shock us if we weren't so like immune to being shocked by Donald Trump after 8 years. But anyway, here's the clip.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is once again just shaking our heads. We're 8 days from the Iowa caucuses, 1 day past the third anniversary of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And Donald Trump is dominating the political conversation in the only way he can, with wild and outlandish comments, among them claiming that the U.S. Civil War could have been avoided if it had been negotiated, mocking the war injuries that the late John McCain sustained as a Vietnam POW, imitating President Biden's stutter. All of this as Biden is trying to frame his own bid around protecting democracy. Yesterday, as CNN obtained shocking new video of rioters directly off the House floor on January 6th, shouting at Capitol Police and Republican lawmakers. Trump attempted to twist the facts about the attack on the Capitol by his supporters, claiming that President Biden was the actual threat to democracy, while 1,265 of Trump's supporters have been charged for their criminal conduct that day. 718 have pleaded guilty. 171 have been found guilty at trial, including for such crimes as seditious conspiracy and using deadly weapons and attacking law enforcement officers. Trump is calling on Biden to release these criminals.
Some people call them prisoners. I call them hostages. Release the J6 hostages, Joe. Release them, Joe. You can do it real easy, Joe.
To be clear, these are not hostages. Hostages are the innocent people Hamas kidnapped from Israel and is now holding in Gaza. Women and children and at least 7 Americans. These are prisoners. Americans accused and convicted in many cases of crimes related to the January 6th insurrection. Now, Trump's role leading up to that day is now a topic for the U.S. Supreme Court, which will decide whether the former president can be disqualified from state ballots in the wake of the Capitol attacks because of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, barring those who engage in insurrection from holding federal office. Now, no one was closer to the events of that day than Trump's vice president at the time, who is in Israel right now to give support to that country in its war against Hamas. And joining me now from Tel Aviv, Israel, is former Vice President Mike Pence.
And I will have an extended, almost 7-minute clip of Mike Pence showing just how the former conservative Republican, like conservative evangelical Republican Party represented by Mike Pence is now totally submissive to the Trump personality cult. He'll at least debunk the FBI was the ones who instigated January 6th, but when you get to that clip, it's the second to last clip. If you look down in the video description at the clip summaries, he won't say it was an insurrection, though. And anyway, I thought that was a great news summary from CNN's State of the Union. Probably the news summary of the week because there were like so many facts packed into there. He didn't show much. Well, he showed the hostages clip and the like, release them, Joe. I was, I've seen that like thing where that Trump clip where he says Joe several times, and it made me think of like the first time that Joe Biden was in a debate with Sarah Palin, the presidential debate in 2008, and how like she asked if she could call him Joe and kept calling him Joe, and maybe for some reason the Trump campaign Trump thinks that like calling him Joe diminishes him somehow, or I don't know. What's the point of calling him Joe over and over again like Trump did in that clip? I don't know. But anyway, the final news summary I'm going to show you was just barely over a minute. CBS News Face the Nation, where they focus on, well, they call it like it's either crisis or serious problem, depending on who you believe. Because I think the Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas called it a serious problem, not a crisis, and Fox News is like, he's lying, it is a crisis, which that's like a totally semantic argument and subjective. And anyway, here I think Face the Nation focused on what's happening at the border as their main story because their big guest is the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and he just, as you'll see at the end of this news summary, had this like news event at Eagle Pass, Texas, about what's going on at the border, because that's a issue Republicans think they can make work for them, also involving the negotiations about Ukraine and Israel aid and more aid to the border, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the final shortest news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Yesterday marked the third anniversary of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And our CBS News polling shows that many Americans in each party are uneasy about the prospects of a peaceful transfer of power in future elections, with half the country expecting there will be violence from the side that loses. Our polling also shows that 3 in 4 Americans see the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border as either a crisis or a very serious situation. That 45% is a notable increase. Both of those issues, democracy and immigration, are dominating the campaign trail as we head into the last week before the first votes in the 2024 election are taken in Iowa. But first, we traveled to Eagle Pass, Texas last week and caught up with House Speaker Mike Johnson, who led a delegation of 64 Republican members of Congress to the Texas-Mexico border on a fact-finding tour.
We have a
So yeah, that was definitely better than what you saw from Fox News Sunday. They talked about the issue of the threat to democracy and Biden's speech, but they also talked about the border issue as like two dueling issues. And I think they focused so much on the border issue because they had this interview with Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, in Eagle Pass, Texas, like I was saying. And I've talked a lot about how, Fox News is actually a partisan, non-journalistic organization. It's really a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, which it was created to be by Roger Ailes, as described in, this book over here, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman. And I documented with hundreds of Fox News bias videos. But the rest of the media, they don't have that partisan political bias, but they do have biases towards sensationalism, simplification, both-sidism, and if they have an exclusive guest, they will definitely bias their news coverage towards whatever issue that exclusive guest may be talking about. And that's why I think Face the Nation did their bias towards immigration, talking to Mike Johnson in Eagle Pass, Texas. But not that it's not an issue, but at least they didn't necessarily call it Biden's border crisis like Fox News does all day, every day, except apparently on Fox News Sunday. But anyway, now I'm going to get to my 5 clips of Republicans, and I think actually one of these people is supposedly on the left, according to Fox News, but that is just, the way that Fox News puts their discussion panels together. This is Fox News Sunday had a little bit of a report on Iowa later in the program where they showed clips. They showed a brief clip of Biden's speech on Friday on the eve of the January 6th anniversary, accusing Trump of being a threat to democracy. And then they show like a clip of Trump really just talking about whether Biden has the energy to give a speech, not really, and they don't really show the real allegations of all the things that Trump has done that are anti-democratic. You saw in the previous news summaries, and you saw cataloged by Jake Tapper in his news summary. But this is like the most discussion of that issue on Fox News Sunday. And basically, this is how I see it discussed on Fox News all the time. It's basically, they say, instead of talking about whether Trump actually is a threat to democracy, if he has like all these dictatorial tendencies, they frame it as like, is this an issue, Biden, the democracy issue, is it going to work for Biden or not work for Biden? And they don't really talk about the substance. They just talk about whether it will work politically. As you can see, there's like a brief part of the news summary with Bill Malugin, who normally reports on the border but is now in Iowa. And then Shannon Bream does another intro with a couple panelists. I'll talk about a little more. One is supposedly a Democrat and the other is a Republican over here.
Trump is targeting President Biden, who called him a threat to democracy during a campaign speech in Valley Forge on Friday.
He's willing to sacrifice our democracy, put himself in power.
He runs out of fuel. The fuel doesn't last very long. So you notice the speeches, they start off very energetic. He's a threat to democracy. By the end, he's like, I got to get off. This is not the man we should have for our president.
Okay, so let's start there. We had this speech from President Biden on Friday, which was very dark. It harkened back to some other speeches he's given saying, listen, I am here to save democracy and freedom. Josh, does it work? Because then we see the mockery you get from former President Trump, who's like, bring it on. You're the real threat to democracy.
Well, look, Shannon, it's a throwback to the successful 2020 campaign message from then candidate Joe Biden. He was going to save the soul of America. And if you look at the polls, you see that issue of democracy, January 6th, is one of the few issues, frankly, that Democrats have an advantage on when it comes to just democracy and the fundamentals of democracy. The challenge, though, is that Biden is now the incumbent. He has a record that he has to defend. Trump is the challenger. He's out of office. So voters care a lot more about the border. They care about the economy. They care about a lot of other issues where Biden has a very deep record on, and they're not viewing this White House favorably on those other issues. So look, it's going to be an issue. It's going to be one that Democrats feel like they have to go back to because it is a winning issue for them. But there are a lot of other issues, bread and butter issues, that voters care a lot more about right now.
Well, and staying with this theme, tomorrow the president is going to move on to South Carolina and speak there. This is how the Philadelphia Inquirer puts it. They say at Mother Emanuel AME, the church there in Charleston next week, Biden expected to call out white supremacy along with the assault on the nation's capital on January 6th. He'll make an appeal to black voters whose support for Biden has decreased in polls compared with 2020. Biden is also losing support among Hispanic and young voters, polls show. So, Josh, what has he got to do in that speech tomorrow?
Well, look, I mean, somebody's going to win this election, but it's not going to be with hope and optimism, obviously. And I think the president's early first 2 speeches show you exactly how they intend to run this entire campaign. He's got a record that, frankly, the American people don't believe in. And when you have that set of circumstances, you got to figure out how to bring an opponent down to where you're at. And where he's at is in the mid-30s from an approval standpoint. So he's got to try to provoke anything he can to get a base of support, some energy, and they've shown very little at this point. And then he's got to try to figure out what unites the middle of the electorate. And in 2020 and 2022, as Josh said, he had some success in convincing center-right sort of suburban electorate that this guy, Donald Trump, is a danger and is a threat. Whether or not that actually takes a precedent over how people feel about the economy or the border or whatever remains to be seen. But he doesn't have a lot of plays in the playbook. This might be the only one he's got.
Well, President Obama counts among those, according to the Washington Post, who is worried about what's going on. They talk about
And there you see Shannon Bream moves on before she actually gets to the real Democrat on the panel. And that analysis was pretty much what I told you it was going to be, that it's not really any sort of analysis of the autocratic things Trump is saying and the threat he poses to the peaceful transfer of power and basically our liberal democracy. That it's one of the biggest threats since the Civil War, which wouldn't have even happened if Trump had been president, because he would have just negotiated it, right? But no, that was the previous clip. But anyway, that was what passed for analysis of the Trump threat to democracy on Fox News Sunday. And that's like the first Republican clip I'm going to show you, as I promised in the introduction. And now the rest of these clips are actual Republican politicians, starting with, other than Donald Trump, probably the most powerful Republican, the Speaker of the House. And you may remember when he was finally made Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, there was this news conference where Virginia Fox, the representative, one of the other members of the House, when Mike Johnson was asked about how he was in charge of this lawsuit to reject the results of the 2020 election, he didn't answer the question. She yelled like, shut up, shut up. I even used that as my political comedy clip right after Mike Johnson became Speaker of the House. Well, in this next clip, you're going to see that Margaret Brennan on CBS News' Face the Nation actually asked him extensively about that lawsuit and whether he rejected the results of the election and whether whether it was a legitimate election. And he stuck to this really stupid Republican talking point. And I don't think Margaret Brennan did the greatest job of cross-examining him on it. He, at one point, I have here, by the way, my ACLU Constitution. Right under the video, there are a couple links where if you become a monthly patron on Patreon at $5 a month, or even give a one-time contribution at $5, and give me a shipping address, I will, in the United States, I will send you this ACLU Constitution with a Know Your Rights with the Police part in the back, and as well as this weatherproof vinyl #LiberalViewer sticker. And if you had this Constitution, you could look at the second paragraph of Article 2, Section 1, which you're about to see the Speaker of the House refer to. And it says, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. So it's the state legislatures are supposed to direct how electors in the states are appointed. The electors are the people who actually vote for president, based on how the people in the state vote. Then these electors are appointed and vote in the Electoral College. You can read all about it in this Constitution if you really want to know how it works. But that led to this really right-wing, bogus state legislature theory that some Republicans had back in 2020, that only the state legislatures could decide how electors were selected. That, like, if the state legislatures passed a law and the governor vetoed it, governor vetoes were no good. Or the courts reinterpreted their law or interpreted the laws for some new circumstance, like a huge pandemic. That's what happened in 2020, is the courts changed the ways that people could vote a little bit because they were interpreting the laws passed by the legislature and applying the situation of a pandemic. These radical right-wing Republicans said, no, only state legislatures can decide. And the thing is, more than 6 months ago, in June of 2023, the Supreme Court, in the case of Moore versus Harper, in a 6-3 decision, and this is the post-Trump, 3-Trump appointee 6-3 conservative court, voted 6-3 that idea that state courts can't interpret the laws passed by state legislatures when it comes to appointing electors, that was bogus, that is not how state governments work. And in the chat here, for the live viewers, I put a link to that Supreme Court opinion if you want to see it yourself. But you're about to see both the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and then I think the third most powerful Republican, if I have her title right, Representative Elise Stefanik. They both make this bogus argument that the states unconstitutionally changed their voting laws. That means that, like, the courts gave expanded ability for people to vote by mail or whatever because there was a pandemic going on, or to have like drop-off boxes instead of, well, I mean, there were like certain changes the courts made, or they interpreted the laws to allow, I should say. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch Mike Johnson make that argument and try to explain it. And Margaret Brennan sort of cross-examines it, but doesn't mention Moore versus Harper over in this clip.
2021, you were the lawmaker who circulated the legal brief known as the Texas amicus brief, challenging the 2020 election outcome in a number of states, which by CBS editorial standards makes you an election denier.
That's nonsense.
Well, can I get you on the record on that?
I've always been consistent on the record. Did you read the brief? Did you get a chance to read what we filed with the Supreme Court?
Well, I have read extensively some criticisms of that.
You read commentary about the brief, but not what we submitted to the court.
But you recognize that President Biden won the 2020 election. Can you just put that aside as an issue?
President Biden was certified as the winner of the election. He took the oath of office. He's been the president for 3 years. The argument that we presented to the court, which is our only avenue to do so, was that the Constitution was clearly violated in the 2020 election. It's Article 2, Section 1, and anyone can Google it and read it for themselves. The system by which you choose electors to elect the president of the United States must be done by the individual states, and the system must be ratified by the state legislatures. That is language, plain language out of the Constitution.
Have issues with the validity of the 2020 election.
The Constitution was violated in the run-up to the 2020 election. Not always in bad faith, but in the aftermath of COVID, many states changed their election laws in ways that violated that plain language. That's just a fact. We presented that argument and those facts to the court, and it was never directly addressed because of the Texas litigation. But that was the only vehicle we had to present that issue squarely to the court.
It was completely shut down as an issue. But your colleague Liz Cheney, your former colleague, wrote Mike Johnson and our Republican leaders had played a destructive role. You, she says, convinced 125 other Republican members of Congress to sign on to an amicus brief that many never read, that made numerous false, factual, and constitutional claims. How do you respond to that and the impression that you might have contributed in some way?
No, I don't spend much time responding to Liz Cheney's criticism these days. Liz Cheney worked with the Democrats on the January 6th Select Committee to make all of this even more politicized than it was. She was a close friend and colleague before she made those choices.
Yeah. Which is why she was surprised, she said.
Well, I'm surprised that she's giving that criticism, because during that process, Liz and I were in constant dialogue about that, and at one point, she even considered signing on to that bill. I'll tell you that is a fact, to that amicus brief. And we talked about that at great length, and we had a difference of opinion on the law, and people can agree to disagree on that, but I'm telling you that the plain language of the Constitution has never changed, and what happened in many states by changing the election laws without ratification by the state legislatures is a violation of the Constitution. That's a plain fact that no one can dispute.
How do you make sense of the idea that you still have issues with the validity of the 2020 election, but you have to negotiate and talk with the President of the United States, Joe Biden?
This is water under the bridge. I mean, when the Supreme Court it passed on the Texas litigation and did not address the issue, I believe in the rule of law. This is our system. We move forward. I work with President Biden as the President of the United States. I think that he will be a one-term president, but, you know, this discussion about what happened in 2020 is yesterday's news.
Well, I want to ask you, though, because a majority of House Republicans voted to authorize an impeachment.
And then you can see, by the way, down in the video description, if you go to the link under sources I put for CBS News' Face the Nation, you can see the full episode on their YouTube channel and see the rest of that about the Biden impeachment and the stuff before. There's actually a really extensive interview with the Speaker of the House, but you saw there that the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said it's a fact. It's just a fact that what the states did was they unconstitutionally changed their election laws without being ratified by the state legislatures, and that's unconstitutional. And like I said, that is not unconstitutional when the courts interpret the laws passed by the legislature for the, unforeseen needs of a COVID pandemic, as I was describing before I showed the clip. And that was the whole, like, only the state legislatures can decide is not a fact, because it was rejected specifically by the court in Moore v. Harper. I put a link in the live comments. I'll put it in the video description for the recorded show viewers. But that was a case decided last June by the Supreme Court. And it was the three so-called liberal justices plus John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh. The three against were Thomas, Alito, and Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch were the three against. So I guess they got Kavanaugh as well as Amy Coney Barrett. I have to go look again. But anyway, 6-3 rejected what Mike Johnson, I think Kavanaugh did a concurrence or whatever, but it's not really that important. Was still worth the cross-examination by Margaret Brennan that didn't happen there. And you're going to see the same bogus claim from Elise Stefanik without any good cross-examination by Kristen Welker on NBC News' Meet the Press. This is after Elise Stefanik also called the people on trial or convicted for crimes on January 6th, called them hostages, without pushback really from Kristen Welker on that, but also no mention of Moore v. Harper when Elise Stefanik makes the claims you see here.
You mentioned Pennsylvania. Would you vote to certify, and will you vote to certify the results of the 2024 election, no matter what they show?
Well, I voted not to certify the state of Pennsylvania because, as we saw in Pennsylvania and other states across the country, that there was unconstitutional acts circumventing the state legislature and unilaterally changing election law.
What about 2024? What about 2024?
We will see if this is a legal and valid election. What we're seeing so far is that Democrats are so desperate, they're trying to remove President Trump from the ballot. That is a suppression of the American people, and the Supreme Court is taking that case up in February. That should be a 9-0 to allow President Trump to appear on the ballot, because that's the American people's decision to make this November.
And the matter is, of course, halted pending that appeal, as you say. But just to be very clear, I don't hear you committed to certifying the election results. Will you only commit to certify the results if former President Trump wins? Does that mean if former President Trump wins?
No, it means if they are constitutional. What we saw in 2020 was unconstitutional circumventing of the Constitution, not going through state legislatures when it comes to changing election law. And we're seeing this in my home state of New York, Kristen. We are seeing Democrats try to steal the election and illegally gerrymander congressional districts that we fairly won and are fair line. So I see this at a very local level, as well as the unconstitutional overreach we saw at the national level in 2020.
I want to move on to the university presidents, but just to put a fine point on this, Mr. Trump, his allies did take their case, their concerns about the election to court more than 60 times. They lost every time. Mr. Trump hired 2 independent firms to investigate that. They came up short, as well as the federal agency responsible for overseeing election security, CISA, said that the 2020 election was the most secure in American history. But let's move on to the university
Well, let me make a
presidents.
final point, and I think it's important because the American people understand that it was not a fair election. We had unconstitutional overreach, and that was why I objected to certain states when it came to my constitutional responsibility as a member of Congress. I'm going to always stand up for the Constitution and make sure that we have strong election integrity. And the real threat to democracy is Joe Biden and Democrats who are attempting to remove President Trump from the ballot because Joe Biden knows he can't win at the ballot box.
Again, there's no evidence of coordination between Biden and DOJ. But let's talk about the university presidents because of...
Oh, see, look, I got Chong. Now you've seen live pictures of both my cats. This is Chong. You saw Cheech before. And you also just saw Elise Stefanik make that same bogus argument that only state legislatures get to decide how electors are chosen, not the state courts or governors getting their chance to veto legislation. And that's just not how governments work at the state level. Oh, see, I told you Chong wouldn't stand for this very long. I'll put him down. Anyway, that was the second clip making that bogus state legislature theory argument that didn't get really good cross-examination from either NBC or CBS on the whole Moore versus Harper Supreme Court decision. But now I'm going to show you probably the most pathetic example of the Republican Party being a Trump personality cult. And that's Mike Pence refusing to call what happened on January 6th an insurrection, even though people were trying to hang him to stop him from facilitating the peaceful transfer of power, which is why it was an insurrection. Although, at least, like I said earlier, he does admit that January 6th wasn't instigated by the FBI, which you hear from a lot of crazies on the right. And anyway, I will talk about that pathetic example of submissiveness of the former conservative evangelical wing of the Republican Party, which are now totally subservient to the Trump personality cult. At least Mike Pence is, it looks like to me. You can let me know what you think as we watch that clip together over here.
Yesterday marked the 3rd anniversary of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. A Washington Post poll this week found that 1/3 of Republicans believe the falsehood that it's probably or definitely true that the FBI instigated the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. President Trump was spreading that lie just this weekend, falsely claiming the FBI was, quote, leading the charge on January 6th. It's not true. Obviously, your life, the lives of your family members were threatened that day. What do you say to those, including your former running mate, who are actively spreading this baseless lie, or maybe even more importantly, to those who believe it?
Well, I would say to every American, as I did during my presidential campaign, that I know I did my duty that day to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I kept my oath, and they also simply need to look to the facts that the Capitol Hill police endured great hardship and great harm. I think over 120 officers were injured. I saw many of them moving through the garage where I was spirited on the same day. And the truth is that this was a riot that should never have happened. As I've said many times before, the former president's words that day were reckless. I believe his history will judge his role in that. But at the end of the day, where I live every day, and frankly, the words of encouragement that I receive on a regular basis is I know, by God's grace, we did our duty that day 3 years ago. But I will tell you, Jake, that I understand why President Biden wants to focus his campaign on 3 years ago. The record of this administration has weakened America at home and abroad. And, I actually don't think the election's going to be decided on a tragic day 3 years ago. I think it's going to be decided on the failed policies of the Biden administration, that have emboldened the enemies of freedom around the world, that launched the worst inflation, that created the worst crisis on our border in American history. And it's one of the reasons why I continue to hope that with the Iowa caucuses, New Hampshire just around the corner, that all the good Republican voters in those states will give our party a fresh start and give us new leadership to lead our party forward in the election and beyond.
Is there somebody other than Donald Trump that you want the voters of Iowa to get behind? Is there somebody you prefer, whether it's Governor DeSantis or Ambassador Haley? You are somebody whose endorsement could actually make a difference with any wavering Republicans who want a fresh start, as you note.
Well, I've been speaking to several of my old competitors, I think very highly of Nikki Haley, of Ron DeSantis, and frankly, Chris Christie's been a friend for many years. And I don't put a lot of stock in endorsements. I'm not sure whether I'm going to weigh in or if and when I will. But, you know, I ran for president because I think different times call for different leadership, Jake. And I'm hoping that the good people of Iowa that I got to know so well in my campaign, the good people of New Hampshire and South Carolina, will look at this moment and recognize that elections are about the future. And we need new leadership in the Republican Party. We certainly need new leadership in the White House to move us forward. And if I see an opportunity to have an impact on achieving that, I'll certainly do it, and I'll keep you posted.
It's not just President Biden who's focusing on January 6th, of course. You have Donald Trump still talking about it. Do you want to just take this opportunity to clear up this lie that the FBI was leading the charge on January 6th? It's obviously not true. I'm sure you know it's not true. Do you want to make that clear to the voters?
You know, I've seen the director of the FBI repeatedly assure the American people that the FBI were not the instigators of the riot that occurred on January 6th. And frankly, I'm very grateful for the efforts of the FBI to bring nearly 1,000 people to justice who ransacked our Capitol and did violence against police officers that day. But you're right. We've been assured again and again that it was not the case. And I just must tell you, having been there that day, I mean, to see people literally breaking windows, ransacking the Capitol, it just infuriated me. I remember thinking, you know, not this, not here, not at the United States Capitol. And I believe everyone that conducted that riot at the Capitol needs to be held to the fullest extent of the law. I'm pleased that many have, but I've never been given any information. I've heard the many repeated assurances from the FBI that they were not involved, and I take them at their word.
There was late news on Friday evening. The U.S. Supreme Court is going to hear and decide whether former President Trump can be disqualified from a presidential ballot under the 14th Amendment's ban on insurrectionists holding office. Former Congresswoman Liz Cheney on Friday would not go so far as to say that she supports taking Trump off the ballot, but she did say, quote, his actions clearly constituted an offense that is within the language of the 14th Amendment, unquote. My guess, covering you for some time now, is that you don't support taking Trump off the ballot. You probably prefer that that be left up to the voters. But setting that aside, do you think Donald Trump engaged in insurrection?
I've never called what happened on January 6th an insurrection. And it is noteworthy that even in the federal case in Washington, D.C., the president hasn't been charged with insurrection. Jake, I was there. It was a riot, the way it broke out, and I've never seen it any other way. And while I said that the president's words were reckless, and I believe that history and the American people will hold him ultimately to account for his role in that day. I think these efforts to take the decision away from the American people are really antithetical to the very democracy that President Biden and many Democrats talk about wanting to defend. I'm very confident that the American people will choose wisely. I'm confident that we'll run our elections, but removing the former president or any other candidate from the choice of the American people, I don't believe is in the interest of the country. And I have reason to be confident in that the Supreme Court of the United States will see it just that way.
Two tough anniversaries this weekend.
So, yeah, that is the end of the interview there. And like I said, pretty much a pathetic, submissive display from Mike Pence based on what he experienced on January 6th. I mean, at least he said it wasn't instigated by the FBI, but other than that, not much of a call for accountability against Donald Trump. And then the last newsmaker clip I want to show you here is from a Texas Republican. This is Representative Tony Gonzalez, and he has been a big critic of what Donald Trump did on January 6th and doesn't really endorse a lot of the autocratic, anti-democratic things that Trump has said, but he is still endorsing Trump for president. And George Stephanopoulos tries to get to the bottom of that, does some pretty good cross-examination, which I will show you for the final newsmaker clip, and we'll talk about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
Also called the rioters domestic terrorists. But President Trump calls that day not a dark and low day. He calls it a beautiful day. He also calls those people you call domestic terrorists hostages who deserve pardons. So you've endorsed President Trump. Do you now agree with his belief that January 6th was a beautiful day?
Well, George, Donald Trump wasn't responsible for January 6th. The anger in this that was built up by people that no longer believe in the system are what was responsible. And that hasn't changed. More and more people do not believe in the systems. And you got to, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but you have to believe in our institutions. I look at it through the lens, that was a dark day. And I never want to see January 6th happen again or something like that, or riots across our country. How do we calm everybody down? How do we bring this country together? I'd also say in my district, which is 42% of the southern border, 70% Hispanic, people aren't talking about January 6th. They're talking about feeling safe in their homes. They're talking about putting food on the table, keeping their kids safe in school.
But President Trump is talking about January 6th. Again, he is calling it a beautiful day. He's talking about pardons for those people you call domestic terrorists. Do you believe those rioters should be pardoned?
Well, they're certainly not hostages. When I think of a hostage, I think of what happened, Hamas taking the hostages in Israel just 3 months ago. They're certainly not heroes. They broke the law, and we have to obey our laws. We are a nation of laws, and they have to obey the laws. I'd also understand we never got to the root of why they did that. It was always kind of a brush over, and it immediately went into politics. If we continue to kick the can down the road and not get to the root of the issue of why people are angry, it's going to create more dangers.
Well, but Congressman, hold on a second. There's a lot of evidence. There's a lot, and part of the reason they were angry is they were fed a lot of lies about the election from the man you now support to be president again.
Well, they felt as if President Biden stole that election, and nothing has changed since then.
But wait, did President Biden steal the election?
Of course not. Of course he didn't steal he's the president of the United States. But Senator Biden was this bipartisan deal-making individual that everyone thought they were going to get. President Biden has turned out to be much different. Now, I hope that changes, right? We have some very big ticketed items. This national security package is the first thing that comes to mind. But this is the reason why Americans are angry and upset. And unless we tackle that issue, we're going to see more of the same. I worry about 9/11, but I also worry about, think back to Oklahoma City bombing. I mean, when people are angry, they do desperate things.
But, sir, that anger is being stoked by the man that you have endorsed for President of the United States. That's what I don't understand. You've been very forthright here. You've called the rioters domestic terrorists. You've said they're not hostages. President Trump says they are hostages, says he's going to pardon them. You've called it a dark day. He calls it a beautiful day. I don't understand, given all that, why you've endorsed him for President of the United States.
Well, I think back to the policies when President Trump was in office, and I think back to my district. We did not have the border crisis that we have now. We did not have the humanitarian turmoil. We did not have the chaos. That's the number one thing. In my district, our lives are turned upside down, and we just want to get back to normal. It's the reason why you're seeing the polls say Hispanic voters are no longer an automatic yes for the Democratic Party. What I mean by this is we just have to solve people's issues. And the issues in my district is the border's turned upside down. It's the reason why I hosted Speaker Johnson and over 60 members of my colleagues on Wednesday. And it's the reason 2 days later I host my Democrat colleague, Don Davis from North Carolina. I just want solutions. I think the American public also wants solutions.
I don't disagree with you. I think people want solutions, but how can you have solutions if you can't agree on something as fundamental as the peaceful transfer of power?
I do think that's fundamental, but it's also an election year. So you're going to see everybody throw fuel on the fire as fast as they can, and the rhetoric is only going to increase. We're at the beginning of this year, so it's only going to increase as things go on. I'd much rather see leaders come to the table and go, how do we solve problems? The reason why I suspect, I spoke with one of the Senate negotiators, that we will see a Senate package this week, and that's encouraging. I want us to see that. I want us to start talking about how we tackle these national security issues that we have. The president put forward a $14 billion supplemental package. Well, George, only $2 billion of that is for security, border security. These are the devils in the details, and I think there's an opportunity here for us to protect America, keep Americans safe, but also protect our allies, Israel and Ukraine.
If you want to bring people together, if you want to solve these problems, doesn't the responsibility begin with not endorsing a candidate for president who's spreading lies about the last election?
Endorsements are, this is what I've learned about endorsements. You get all their enemies and hardly any of their friends. Endorsements are just a piece of paper. But I do endorse President Trump. And I do think President Trump policies were very successful, and I look forward to getting back to those policies. And I'm not going to back away from that. I think the American public are not happy with the current situation that is happening, and something has to change.
But what he's talked about, if he's president again, is suspending the Constitution, using the military to suppress protests under the Insurrection Act, pardoning those protesters, and bringing treason charges against the outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You're endorsing that as well.
And yeah, that was great cross-examination by George Stephanopoulos, although Tony Gonzalez's answers did not get any better after that. It was pretty much more of the same. Like I said, down in the video description under sources, you can go through the whole rigmarole to watch the whole episode of ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I think it might be on Hulu, since ABC Disney owns Hulu. So if you have Hulu, you can probably watch it for free pretty easily. But anyway, that's the last of the clips. That last Republican there, Tony Gonzalez, I mean, he actually says a whole bunch of true things about what happened on January 6th and the 2020 election, but still endorses Trump because, yeah, maybe he's a threat to democracy, but it's an election year and people are going to throw things on the fire. I don't even know what that means. Like, I like his policies better, or, isn't there something that transcends the whole policy dispute? That's what I learned from the fact that I'm on the same side as Representative or former Representative Liz Cheney on this issue, that there are certain Republicans like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, and sort of Mike Pence, I don't know, wishy-washy Mike Pence, who are rejecting some of the excesses from the Trump era, and especially the autocratic, anti-democratic ones, but not very strongly. And I believe we're about to see the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primary, South Carolina primary are going to confirm that the Republican Party is a Trump personality cult. There's like a really slight chance Nikki Haley could come in second in Iowa, like a good 20% showing, like I was saying a couple weeks ago, then win New Hampshire, win South Carolina, and then maybe be a threat to Trump for Super Tuesday, but that is like a total long shot. But anyway, next week, I will probably do this live stream before we know the results of the Iowa caucuses. Maybe I'll do it after. That's what I'm trying to decide, because I'll show you a whole bunch of clips from the Sunday shows the day before the caucuses, but then my show will be right around the time of the caucuses. I don't know if it's worth waiting or not. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section for my most loyal viewers who are still watching at this point. There's a cat hanging from my chair here. I apparently Cheech wants to be on camera one more time here as we watch the bonus. For a while, Cheech and Chong were like battling over to my left, and they do that a lot, and that's my bonus Cheech and Chong clip for the Cheech and Chong, the kitten fans out there. Here is their the way they battle. 30 seconds of battle. Oh, oh. So yeah, that was a battle in the bathroom. You can see here, Cheech doesn't even want to leave. He's like actually purring. He's got these little grunty purrs. So I guess Cheech wanted to be here for the end of the show. And I hope you appreciated all the time and effort I put into picking out the clips. Oh, I saw I got a nice super chat contribution from Matthew along the way. Thank you for that, Matthew. There's right under the video, you can become a YouTube member of my channel and support me through YouTube, although actually YouTube takes out a big chunk of that for the more cost-effective ways. Right under the video, I have links to my Patreon page and a PayPal link. Like I was saying earlier in the program, $5 or more contribution with the shipping address, you'll get this ACLU Constitution and this #LiberalViewer weatherproof vinyl sticker. Oh, hey Lulu girl at the end. I'm glad to see you got to see live kitten shot. And anyway, I will be back next Monday sometime around the Iowa caucuses and every Monday for the next year or so. And until next Monday, or until I have some other reason to upload a video, Cheech just loves being here on camera, I guess. But until next Monday, or until I have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.